Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. In my last video, I showed the tools and supplies that you'd need to keep your guns running during a long-term survival situation. But like with anything else, having stuff isn't going to get you anywhere if you don't know how to use it. Firearms are complex machines made of dozens of small parts which are subjected to extreme levels of stress. So there's a lot that can go wrong, especially if you're a high-volume shooter. So today we're going to talk about some of the most common reasons that guns malfunction and how to deal with them. And just to let the content folks at YouTube know, we're not talking about modifying anything. This is just a discussion on how to keep guns running safely and reliably. The primary reason why most guns malfunction is that they're dirtier than a career politician, and there's a lot of reasons for this. First off, people are busy. They'll go to the range, shoot, put the gun back in the holster or case, and then just go on with life. Then many gun owners don't know how to field strip their firearms to properly clean them. They'll run a bore snake, put a couple of drops of oil in random places they think might be important, and then move on. Then, to make things worse, some guns just have a reputation for being reliable even without regular cleaning, so that's what some people end up doing. I'm looking at you, Glock and AK owners, but a dirty gun can cause various issues, and a lot of them center around a firearms chamber and the parts close to it. If the chamber is dirty, this can cause both ejection and extraction failures. I'm going to show a couple examples of these, and I'll be using snap caps or dummy rounds to make it as safe as possible. A failure to eject, also known as a stovepipe, is where a spent case exits the chamber but gets caught up on the slide on a semi-automatic handgun or between the bolt and receiver on a rifle. Then a failure to extract, also known as a double feed, is where the slider bolt comes back without removing the spent case from the chamber and then picks up another round that collides with the old case. Having a dedicated chamber brush and chamber rod can help with this because many times people will just clean the bore and chamber with the same brush, but the issue with that is that the brush is sized for the bore, which is just a little bit smaller than the chamber, meaning the chamber doesn't get cleaned very well. Then failures to fire can be caused by numerous things, including a dirty firing pin channel. And if a firing pin channel is really dirty, you could also end up with what's called a slam fire. This is mainly an issue with firearms that have a free-floating firing pin like AR-15s and SKSs, but basically what happens is grease or other crud builds up in the firing pin channel, or stuff gets wedged between the firing pin and bolt face, causing it to stay in a forward position. You try to chamber around and then it fires as soon as it closes, which can be pretty dangerous and may also result in you having to throw your underwear away. Then also keep in mind that certain kinds of ammo are dirtier than others, and the most common example of this is probably steel-cased ammo. Steel, just by its nature, doesn't expand as much as brass does when around fire, so that means that it won't seal as well against your chamber, which allows more fouling to go back into the gun rather than into and out of the barrel, and then lead bullets tend to shoot a little dirtier than jacketed ones. Another reason guns malfunction is faulty or junky magazines, and the best way to avoid this is to just get good magazines to begin with. Bargain bucket mags usually aren't the best choice, so try to get something proven, like P-mags for ARs or factory mags for things like Glocks. Metgar makes good aftermarket handgun magazines, but they don't make mags for everything. Now, even if you get good mags, things can still go wrong. I've actually had a bad P-mag, and neither of the factory magazines for my SP01 will feed certain rounds. So be sure to do thorough testing of all of your equipment and have plenty of mags so that if you start to experience malfunctions, you can just swap those out and determine if that was the issue before you start tearing down the gun. One of the best indicators that you have a faulty magazine is a failure to feed. Usually the round ends up in some weird no man's land where the front of it's wedged in the chamber while the back stays in the magazine, or the round will just straight up nosedive back into the magazine. This can be caused by a weak magazine spring, damaged feed lips on the mag, or a bad follower. And to me, a wonky follower is the best indicator of a potentially bad magazine. If the follower moves back and forth like a toddler's rocking horse, it's very likely you'll experience issues. Then another reason your gun could malfunction is bad ammo, and this can take several different forms. For example, I had a 9mm round with a bent case lip. I guess the bullet caught on the side of the case as it was being seated and deformed it. That one obviously wouldn't feed because it was out of spec. It could also be older ammo that wasn't stored properly. You may have some rounds go off, others that don't, and you could even have hang fires where the firing pin hits the primer and it doesn't go off until a few seconds afterwards. So if you have a dud, keep the gun pointed downrange to make sure it's actually a dud. Another thing that could result in faulty ammo is poor quality hand loads. Now, that's not to say that I'm against reloading, because I do it myself, but it has to be done properly, and you shouldn't use hand loads from just anyone. You never know if some idiot used the wrong powder, which could potentially cause a kaboom where the gun literally blows up in your hands, but it doesn't even have to be something that serious. When I was in college, my roommate got a new deer rifle, and somebody that he knew gave him some of the reloads, but he could not get those to chamber. My best guess is that the guy only resized the neck on those rounds, so maybe they'd work in his rifle, but not in my friend's due to a very small variation in the sizes of the chambers between the two rifles. So when it comes to reloads, they need to be done by somebody that knows what they're doing, preferably you. Then another issue you could come across is a squib load. This is where a cartridge doesn't have enough powder in it to get the bullet all the way down the barrel, and a lot of the times these don't even have any powder at all. The primer ignites, has enough energy to send the bullet part way down the barrel, then it gets stuck, and when the shooter fires the next round, bad stuff happens. Barrels can bulge or split, and sometimes even more exciting things can happen. It can also happen with factory ammo, but it's rare. So if a round seems a lot less powerful than others when you fire it and you can't tell if your target has a new hole in it, stop what you're doing, break the gun down, and make sure a bullet isn't stuck in the barrel. Another reason that firearms malfunction is worn out springs, and I have some experience with this one. The first time that I came across this was with a Hungarian clone of a Browning high power. I had that thing for years, and I could never figure out why it had so many double feeds. I cleaned it, swapped out magazines, and still had issues. Then finally, I swapped out two springs, the recoil spring and the extractor spring, and that combination finally fixed the problem. Now, I'm not a professional gunsmith, but my best guess is that when I put in a new recoil spring, it slowed down the slide cycling speed just a little bit, and the new extractor spring put a little more bite on the case, which resulted in reliable extraction. Before that, I think the slide was moving so fast that the extractor just slipped off the case rim. Then I ended up selling that gun shortly thereafter for my SP01, so I didn't really even get to enjoy its newfound reliability. Then I also had an issue with an old 96 Mauser where I started to get light strikes. I swapped out the firing pin spring and the problems went away. Then weak hammer springs can cause similar issues on other firearms. Then something that'll definitely cause a firearm to malfunction is broken parts. Extractors are a common culprit when it comes to this, since they're relatively thin. I mean, really, they have to be in order to fit inside of a case rim. If all of a sudden you're having double feed after double feed, unload the gun and do a field strip. There's a really good chance that your extractor claw has sheared off, kind of like a fingernail. Ejectors are another common point of failure, along with locking blocks and slide stops, since they're subjected to a lot of strain as a pistol operates. And some guns will have known weak points, like the trigger return spring on CZ75s. So, like what we talked about in my last video, be aware of any common points of failure and have the parts and tools that you'd need to address those. And one of the biggest reasons why guns malfunction is one that some people don't like to talk about, and that's that the gun itself is just low quality. Now, I'm not someone who thinks that you have to spend $1,000 or more to have a good quality firearm, but the fact of the matter is that some guns are just a lot better than others, and most of that's due to how they make their parts and then their quality control, both of which can increase cost. The best way to determine this about a specific firearm is to look at as many reviews as you can, or base it on your own personal experiences. And then it's also important to remember that even good companies have lemons, but that is a little more rare. Then another common cause of malfunctions is poor shooting technique, and this is mainly an issue with semi-automatic handguns. When you're firing a pistol, in order for it to cycle properly, you have to give it a stable platform to operate as that slide goes back and comes forward. A lot of new shooters either don't have a proper grip or will limp wrist it, And both of those can cause the firearm to go all over the place as they're shooting. When this happens, too much energy transfers into their wrists and arms rather than cycling the firearm. This can result in failures to eject and failures to extract. So here I have an unloaded Glock 20 and I am gripping it properly. My hand is high on the back of the gun and my wrist and fingers are firm. When I pull on the slide, pretty much all that energy goes into moving the slide backwards since I'm providing it a stable platform by holding the gun the right way. Then if I loosen my grip a little bit and relax my wrist too much, you can see that a lot of that energy goes into moving the gun around in my hand and then also moving my wrist back. Since I don't have a proper grip there, I'm basically stealing energy that should be going into the cycling of the slide, and then the same thing happens when you shoot with improper technique. Now, obviously, this isn't a complete list of every reason why a gun could potentially malfunction. Every gun's unique and has its own quirks, so be sure to figure out what those are. If you want to see a list of the tools and supplies you need to keep your guns running long term, then click here. Or if you want to see my top picks for the kinds of guns you need to survive a long-term disaster, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.